Hey everyone, welcome to another Lazy Shell tutorial video. Today's lesson is the audio editor. It's funny, back in the day when Lazy Shell was in its earlier stages, I remember the creator of Lazy Shell saying that he was not taking requests for things to add to the editor, so please stop asking for an audio editor. So here we are in the audio editor. You may recall in another video I said you don't have to be a programmer to use certain editors, but having that background might help. Similarly, you don't have to have a background in music to use this editor, but being able to read music will definitely help. Using this editor will require you to know some things about how to read music, such as note and rest types, key signatures, clefs, and other music terms. Teaching you all of that is beyond the scope of this video. I'm going to be teaching you how to use this editor, assuming you are at least somewhat familiar with these concepts already. This top area is the samples editor. In layman's terms, samples are the instruments that the game has available to make sound effects and music. Many samples are instruments in digital form, but some aren't instruments, like slaps, laughs, or other sound. Relative frequency. This is used to tune the sample. To put it simply, tuning is making sure all of the instruments sound good when they're playing the same note. You can either change the frequency directly by entering a number in this box, or by selecting plus and minus, a half, or a whole step, and then pressing this pitch button. Relative gain changes the volume of the sample relative to the game's master volume. You can use this to make some samples louder or quieter than other samples in general. Loop start. Most samples have pretty short lengths. We're talking a fraction of a second. If the sample you're using needs to hold a note that lasts longer than the length of the sample will need to loop back on itself at some point in order to keep playing. The loop start box tells the sample what point to start back at if it needs to loop. If the value entered is 0, or if the value entered exceeds the length of the sample in bytes, the sample will loop back from the start. The loop start is visualized by this gray line. To replicate real-life instruments, many of these samples will start out quietly while building to full volume. Let's look at the clarinet, instrument number 19, for an example of how this works. Here's what it sounds like looped as is. Now, if we set the loop start to 0, so it loops back from the beginning, it sounds like this. Editing these sample properties changes them in every song and sound effect that sample is used in. If you want to change how a sample sounds in just one particular song or sound effect, you need to do that down below, in the SPC's editor. Here you can edit songs, battle sound effects, and event sound effects. Sound effects and music work very similarly to each other, the difference being that music tracks utilize many more samples and notes at a time compared to sound effects. I'll start with event sound effects, just to make it easier to see, but FX and music use the same commands. Over on the right is the channel tracks section. The Super Nintendo has 8 audio channels, which means it can play up to 8 samples at one time. Sound effects use up 2 of these channels. You can select and unselect these boxes if you want the sound to use only one channel, like this sound effect does. This drop-down contains all the commands you can use in a track. You first have to select the command, then click this button on the right to add it to the track before you can change its properties down below. If there is anything to change about that command. Many commands don't have properties to edit, they just do what they say in the name. There are also options to delete, copy, paste, duplicate, and move commands that are in the track. Let's talk about these commands and what they do. Just to reiterate, this is not a music theory class. There's an expectation that you are already somewhat familiar with music terminology, like quarter notes, half notes, sharps, flats, octaves, etc. With that, let's get into it. Note lets you choose what note you want to play, as well as how long it will play. The difference between the note command and the note duration command is that note uses standard music terminology, like quarter notes and half notes, while note duration lets you choose the length of the notes based on a raw number. This number used isn't measured in frames or beats per minute, so you would need to experiment to find the length you need. Octave up and down do exactly what they say they do. It shifts the octave the track plays at up or down by one octave. Octave equals is a very important command. This tells the track what octave the track should be playing. With the exception of samples played in percussion mode, which we'll talk about in a bit, if you don't have this command in a track before a sample starts playing notes, the game won't know what to do. Your song won't play right, and the game might even crash. Slur next note. Another music term. This slurs the note after the command to the one before it, which means there is a less noticeable space between the notes. Noise on channels. You can see down here that there's a command to turn noise off on any given channel. You can use the noise on commands to either turn noise back on per channel or to turn noise back on for all channels at once. Frequency mode. You can use this if you want one sample to sound like multiple copies of the same sample overlapping with each other. For example, you'll see this used in the boulder spell to make the sound of one rolling boulder sound like many. Play channel 0 or play channel 1 of sound effect. The 8 audio channels we talked about are labeled 0 through 7. Sound effects only use channels 0 and 1. You can use these commands to make the current song or sound play the same thing that is in a channel in a particular sound effect. For example, if you had a song where you wanted to add in the coin sound effect, you could use this command to play what plays in the coin sound effect. Keep in mind that you can only choose from event sound effects, not battle sound effects. Transpose 1/16th pitch. This is used to adjust the pitch of the current sample. That way, the sample can play notes that are slightly higher or slightly under the note they're supposed to be playing. Terminate script. An important one, this marks the end of a channel's track. Without this, the game wouldn't know that it's supposed to stop reading commands from that track. However, even if you forget to add one to a channel, Lazy Shell will automatically add one when you go to save it. Beat duration. This changes how fast the song or sound plays. It's important to note that you only need to put this command in one channel to make all the channels play at that speed. In songs, you'll see this command listed often in the first channel as the first command, or close to it. Another important note for you musicians out there, this beat duration number is not the same as tempo. Tempo is measured in beats per minute, but this is not. You'll have to do some experimenting with numbers to find the tempo you want. Audio memory 69 lets you store a value into audio memory. In the event scripts editor, there are some commands that reference the value stored at this memory location. You can use this command to change that value. D3. This is an unknown command. It lets you enter a value, but beyond that, it's unknown what this is for, if anything. Begin and end repeat. If you have a part of your song you want repeated, rather than type out all the note commands all over again, you can use these to repeat it. Begin repeat marks the beginning of the section you want repeated, and you can select how many times you want the section to repeat before moving on. Repeat ending start. You can use this to have different endings for repeated sections of music. You pair this with the end repeat command to mark the start of the ending. Begin infinite repeat. This is how almost all of the songs in the game repeat forever until something tells them to stop. You pair this command with the end repeat command to create a section of commands that will repeat forever. ASDR stands for Attack, Decay, Sustain, and Release. These are more music terms. Attack determines how long it takes a sound to reach full volume. Decay determines how long it takes the sound to go from its attack volume to its sustain volume. Sustain determines the volume of the sound between the decay and release stages, and release determines how long it takes for the sound to end from the moment the sound was triggered. There's also a command to reset these four values. Sample length. Sample length changes how long notes are held out in a sample. Lower the number, the quicker the notes will end. Sample equals. Another important one. This determines what sample or instrument is playing in the channel. Just like with octaves, if you don't specify the sample before the track is supposed to start playing notes, the game won't know what to do, and it could crash. Noise transpose lets you adjust the pitch by very small increments. You'll see this VoxCon parameter as well, but this is another one of those settings I played around with that doesn't seem to affect anything. In the rare cases where this command is used, VoxCon is usually set to 0. Sample fadeout. Like an 80s pop song, this lets you reduce the current track's volume to 0 over a period of time. The larger the number, the longer the fadeout takes. E1 is another command that either does nothing or whose purpose is unknown. Volume. As you might have guessed, this lets you set the volume level for the channel. Volume shift lets you adjust the current volume up or down from its current position by this amount. Positive numbers increase volume, negative numbers decrease it. Volume slide. This shifts the channel to whatever volume you enter here. Time it takes to get to that volume is determined by duration. The bigger the number, the longer it takes to get to that volume. For you musicians in the audience, this is how you add crescendos and decrescendos. Portamento is hard to explain, but it creates a sliding effect to the note immediately after this command from that same note adjusted by the value of the pitch. Duration changes how long it takes to finish that slide. Jumping down here to Portamento on, you can create the same sliding effect, but rather than being just for one note, you can have it last over a period of time, such that any notes played within that period of time would slide together. Portamento looping is confusing to me as it doesn't seem to work, and there is no corresponding off command. I also don't see this command used in the original game. As portamentos are covered by the previous two commands, this command is likely not needed. Speaker balance lets you adjust how the channel sounds between the left and right speakers. 0 is the far left, 255 is the far right, and 127 is the center, where it will sound like it's coming from both speakers evenly. This only does something if you selected the stereo option. Start up the game. A pan sweep moves the sound from one speaker to the other. Pan sweep duration lets you choose where you want the sound to end up and how long it takes to get there. Pan sweep loop duration will constantly oscillate the sound back and forth between the left and right speaker. Reach determines how far it moves during each oscillation, and duration changes the amount of time between each oscillation. The lower the number, the quicker the oscillations. If you want the channel to stop the pan sweep, you can add an additional pan sweep loop command with duration and reach set to 0. EA and EB are another couple of unused or unknown commands. These two transpose commands are similar to the 1/16th transpose commands we saw earlier. The difference is this one adjusts pitch by 1/4 rather than 1/16th. And the difference between these two commands is that from 0 adjusts the pitch starting from the bass note, while the second command transposes the pitch including any other transpose commands. Percussion mode. We're going to talk about these commands later. Bear with me, we're almost at the end of this command list. Tremolo adds a volume changing effect to notes in the channel. When notes are held out, tremolo makes those notes increase in volume and then decrease in volume repeatedly in a wave-like effect. Amplitude changes how extreme or severe these volume changes are, while wavelength changes how long is between these changes. If you want the effect to stop, just like with pan sweep, you can add a second tremolo command with amplitude and wavelength set to 0. Vibrato adds a trembling effect to the channel. It makes the notes sound like they're oscillating between two nearby pitches very quickly. Amplitude changes how high and low in pitch the oscillations get. Wavelength changes how long in between these oscillations. And delay determines how long from when the note is initially played to when the vibrato effect starts. There is a separate command to turn vibrato off. Beat duration change. This works similarly to the first beat duration command, but this one lets you change the beat relative to whatever the beat currently is. You can use positive and negative numbers. Growling roughness. This one is a tough one to explain other than by saying it adds a growling type sound to the channel. If you want a good example of this, listen to the song called "And My Name's Booster" from the game's soundtrack. That saxophone at the very beginning has this growling effect turned on. Roughness determines the severity of the growl, while wavelength changes the time between each growl. F5, another unknown command. And then down here, there's a command to turn that growling effect off. Dizziness is another one that's hard to explain. When notes are played consecutively, meaning there's no rest between them, dizziness sort of makes the first note linger before it moves on to the second one. It makes the transition between the notes less clean, if that makes sense. This dizziness effect is used in the sound effect that plays when you first start a battle. Here's what it sounds like normally with the dizziness on. And here's what it sounds like with the dizziness off. Next, there's reverb. This gives the channel an echoing quality to it. You can see these commands to turn it on and off, and this command here is how you specify what the reverb sounds like. Delay time gives you a bigger or smaller space in between each echo, decay ratio gives you longer lasting echoes, and echo volume makes the echoes sound louder. And then we have these last three, which are unknown or don't do anything. Now let's move on to some information specific to the music tracks. Take a look at the channel tracks on the right. This gives you an idea of what the start of a song should look like. Here's the beat duration command. Again, you only need one beat duration command for all 8 channels. Each channel specifies both an octave and an instrument sample before it starts playing. Again, you have to do that, otherwise the song won't work. We'll look at the score viewer in a second, but first let's turn it off. This section on the left lets you choose the instruments you want to use in the song. You can check these boxes to allow more instruments. The drop-down lets you choose the sample, and the volume lets you specify that instrument's volume. Keep in mind the volume channel command we talked about earlier can be used to temporarily override these values. The reverberation area works the same way as the reverb channel command we saw earlier. You can choose the song's overall reverb qualities. Again, these amounts can be temporarily overwritten by using the reverb command in any given channel. Percussives. Let's jump back to the percussion mode command I told you that we'd talk about. Percussion mode turns the channel into a percussion channel. Non-percussion channels use stereotypical music notes, C, B flat, G sharp, etc., while instruments assigned to the percussion section use these notes to determine which percussion instrument to play. Each percussion instrument is assigned a pitch index. For example, in this song, metronome 2 is assigned the pitch C. When a C shows up on a channel that is in percussive mode, metronome 2 will play. You'll also see that each percussion instrument has an assigned pitch. The letter is the pitch it plays, the number is the octave. What this means is that you can't make instruments assigned to the percussives play different tones. Every time metronome 2 plays in the song, it will play an A note at the 5th octave. You can also adjust each percussive's volume and speaker balance. Now let's take a look at the score viewer. This takes all the commands under channel tracks and lays them out to look like a traditional music score. The staffs represent the channels in order. Percussion mode notes are denoted by X on the music staff, rather than the circular notes. You can use the score viewer to write notes and rests in a traditional fashion rather than through commands. Also change the clefs, key signature, time signature, the height of the staffs so you can fit them on one screen, and the spacing between the notes. The commands on the left let you write, delete, select, copy, cut, and paste notes and rests. For example, let's draw a couple notes here. Got a C half note, and how about another G half note? If you click on a command in the score viewer, it will take you to that command in channel tracks. This is handy if you want to add a command at a particular spot. Last, let's look at the score writer feature. You can use this to write a score with key signature, notes, etc. in the traditional way. Just click on New Staff to get started. As you write more notes, the staff will extend as needed. This is similar to the score viewer, except anything here is not written to the ROM. It's saved in its own file using a file type unique to Lazy Shell called .ls notes. This way, you're free to write your own piece of music without worrying about messing something up on the ROM itself. It also makes it easier to import your music to other projects you might work on. As mentioned before, Lazy Shell isn't perfect, and sometimes ROMs can become corrupted through no real fault of your own, so this is a great way to make sure your music progress is preserved, even if something should happen to the ROM itself. To import your score writer work into the ROM, you must first save it, then export staffs as scripts, from here, turn off the score writer and go back to score viewer. Right-click on a channel track and click Import Channel Script. Okay, we got an error this time. I'd say I get this error about 25% of the time when I import scripts. And I'm glad it happened this time because it helps me illustrate an important point. This error is telling us that the octave of the script is undefined. When you import a staff, the octave is supposed to come along with it, but sometimes, for some reason, it doesn't. And that's when this error pops up. So the way to fix it, you want to go back to the beginning of your track and add an octave. Remember, importing the scripts is not enough to make your song work. You still have to add commands for the octave and the sample of each track, otherwise it won't work. That's it for the audio editor. If you find these videos helpful and you want to see more of them, or if you just want to support the channel in general, please consider subscribing. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out or put them in the comments and I'll do my best to get to them. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.